Bonjour à toutes et à tous et bienvenue pour cette troisième session de notre cycle de conférences. Le thème de la session, c'est assez large puisque c'est bâtiments, quartiers et villes durables. Donc, on va parler d'architecture et d'urbanisme aujourd'hui. Et donc, nous aurons 4 intervenants. Abba Narim Lamba, que je vais présenter tout de suite. Nicolas Ziesel, qui nous a rejoint. Bonjour Nicolas. Christina Garcès, urbaniste, qui va nous rejoindre bientôt. Et enfin, Hélène Chartier. Et nous terminerons, comme tu l'as dit, à 13 h. Donc, je pense qu'on peut commencer tout de suite avec la première présentation. So, it's for me a great pleasure and great honor to introduce you, Abba Narim Lamba. Good morning. And I will introduce you very briefly, and then I will give you the floor. Abba is a graduate of School of Planning and Architecture in New Delhi, and you began your career with Joseph Allenstein as an architect on the India Habitat Center project. And for the last 25 years, you have been working on a range of architectural, urban, and conservation projects in Mumbai and across India. I just want to point out the fact that Abba Narim Lamba Associates has always believed in designing in context and is larger architectural conservation consultancy in India. And for over 2 decades, the practice has focused on museum projects. I think you will have some examples, and also museums across the country. So I won't list all the projects, and I won't list all the prices you got, all the books you wrote, because I would need 1 hour, and I prefer to give you the floor now.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and to see your beautiful city. Is there a way I could, good morning. Today we're talking about sustainability, and I come from a country of 1.4 billion people, and we're soon about to become the largest population across the globe. So nothing perhaps for the planet is more important than sustainability in India. And my practice for the last 25 years has worked across different regions of the country. But to me, since the time that I graduated, I was very certain that we as a planet are on the tipping point, and therefore more and more architectural practices need to look at sustainability. So for the last 25 years, my firm has largely focused on sustainability, urban conservation, and projects that look at being able to at least bridge that gap. Can we go next?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So what is the greenest building? We talk of LEED rating, platinum, but really the greenest building is one that already exists. And the fact that a country like India, which has a built heritage of more than 6,000 years, it's so important to understand that conservation and preservation of buildings really needs to be the mainstream, not just a fringe minority kind of an aspect and practice. To the left, you see an old photograph from the 19th century of Old Delhi, the Mughal Delhi. And to the right, we see the kind of new buildings that have been coming up in the last 4 decades. If you see the left, it was sustainable because the materials were local. There was a certain element of setback, a uniformity, a skyline, a kind of an unspoken but an urban bylaw, which wasn't put down in a book, but there was this very natural way of building. What's happened in the last 40, 50, 60 years is that we have aped the West in that post-colonial construction. For a large part of India, looking at something new, looking at something modern has been the seduction of Western ideas. So glass would work in Paris or in Europe, but it's certainly not going to work in a city like Delhi, where the temperature goes up to 48 degrees Celsius in the summer. And that's where sustainability comes from. And that is the reason that Indian architects and engineers need to start looking within, back to the roots of our own architecture, than just looking at Google Images and Pinterest and downloading European models of construction. The same issue affects our cities on the mountains, the Himalayan belt. And we have a huge Himalayan belt, which obviously is one of the most seismically active zones in the world. And with such a nascent mountain region, which is prone to earthquakes, the kind of construction that we've had really threatens, it's the brink again, because cities all across Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, Shimla, which are built on hill slopes, are certainly not geared at the present sort of urban implosion of population to handle the kind of populations and the kind of construction that we are imposing on this landscape. RCC, is reinforced concrete the only answer? If you see the indigenous architecture of this region, the indigenous architecture of this region employed a dry construction of layers of stone and wood without mortar. And we have the case of a 7-story high temple, which was built in the Bhima Kali temple in Himachal. We just shifted, and it took really the whiplash form after an earthquake, because it was built to handle earthquakes and not to resist them. And that's the question that I've asked myself. What should be our priority as a country which has the largest sort of growing population? Obviously, our answer to housing, to the needs of the population, needs to be addressing that. The numbers, yes, but to make it sustainable. And therefore, when we look at local areas, each region gives the solutions. We have local, beautiful earth buildings in the region of Ladakh, in the north of India. We have an indigenous system of construction that responds to the local climate, to the local terrain and the local materials, and should not we be looking inwards rather than outwards for solutions. This project is a project that I worked on from 2004 to 2007. It's at the height of 11,000 feet. The temperature in the winter dips to -40 degrees Celsius. So we could work in over 3 years, but only between May and October. And the rest of the year, the site was absolutely inaccessible. This is what the site looks like in the winter. It's a dry, high altitude desert. And this was a 15th century Buddhist temple of the Maitreya Buddha. The idol of the Buddha is 3 floors high. And this was built entirely of mud and of local wood. What this project did was, this was on the World Monuments Fund Endangered Monuments of the World. And through a Wilson Challenge grant, instead of giving 50% of the funding as cash, the local citizens, the local villagers, the Basgo committee, they said, we will match your dollar for our people's work, labor, and material. So every household contributed the wood for the construction. The people actually created human chains to carry material up the hill, and the entire community of the Buddhist monks and the local villagers was involved in the conservation. As the only architect or the only person from outside who was part of the project, because the contractor was local, the local village community, and there was no outsider as part of this, the construction team. My answer to this was, yes, we would normally require steel, we would require acro props and a whole lot of entablature to come up with the conservation project. But I did not want to get one single thing, one material that was outside the state and outside the local region. So we improvised. We used the local mud blocks to create buttressing instead of using buttressing. We used the local willow to create the propping systems and the scaffolding. And over 3 seasons, this was the team, they were all locals. This person here in the red shirt is the erstwhile king of Ladakh. He was the patron of the project. And with car jacks. We lifted the columns and the beams. We used local material and local craftsmen to put in, to replace the damaged pieces in the traditional style that they had used for 500 years. And finally, this won the Award of Excellence from UNESCO Asia Pacific for the best conservation project in 2007. So in the last 2 decades and a half, what my practice has been is trying to understand local materials and finding solutions through local craftsmen. We are working currently in Shalimar Bagh in Kashmir, which is a Mughal period. It's one of the most beautiful Mughal landscapes that we are working on. And here to the extreme left, you can see, we're working with art conservation, with wood and lime, but they're all using local materials and local craftsmen as our source of intellectual legacy, really. This is a project slightly south of Kashmir, which is Punjab, which is a region of a lot of history, but also a lot of contested history, because this state of the land of 5 rivers was divided in partition in 1947. Half went to Pakistan and half stayed with India. And it's almost as a response to that, that trauma of one of the world's largest urban migrations of people and exodus on both sides of the border, that people in Punjab almost stayed away from history for 75 years. And it took us, by the time we began this project in 2013, most of these historic buildings were in very severe state of dilapidation because nobody had bothered to look back at the heritage buildings. It had an amazing repository of historic craftsmanship, of chandeliers, of gold leafs, of stucco, of crafts. However, when we began the conservation work and I looked around for local craftsmen who would remember how to work with lime, with traditional materials, we found nobody in the younger generation who knew that, because the younger generation was building with cement, with epoxy, and with the European materials. So we went back to this generation of craftsmen who were in their 80s, and those we brought back to train the younger craftsmen on how to work with lime, how to work with incised plaster, what are the pozzolanic materials that you add locally, that you can source locally to make the plaster stronger. And therefore, I've tried, and we're still trying, to create that bridge between the old and the new, to look at local wisdom, local materials to bridge that gap. We also look at recycling. And when we talk of sustainability, recycling energy, recycling water, everything is important. What about recycling buildings? Because buildings actually, when we're looking at carbon footprint, that is one of the largest consumers of energy. And therefore, if in our own cities, in our own regions, we are able to recycle most of the historic housing stock and the building stock, we would have already made a huge difference. So this is a project which was an old sewage pumping station in Jaipur, which we turned into a cafe. This is a beautiful, now this is south in the city called Hyderabad in Telangana, which is known for computers and for all these computer startups and WizKids. But it has one of the most beautiful royal palaces of the Nizams of Hyderabad, the Chowmahala Palace. I was a consultant on this from the year 2000 to 2007, and this is what we found it in. And when India moved from being, to democracy, what really happened to these royal palaces was that the owners, the erstwhile kings and queens, were left with no money to look after them. And over time, what we did over 6 years was to restore palace by palace, building by building, and using, again, the local lime, the local stone, the local craftsmen. So over a period of 6 years, because this was through the personal funds of Princess Ezra Jah and the wife of the royal Nizam, we restored each and every building. Now let's go to Rajasthan. This is a museum which was part of an erstwhile palace in Bharatpur. And again, back to Delhi from Rajasthan, this was a it was a bus stop. This was an old palace of the royal state of Bikaner. And after independence and democracy, this was taken over by the government and turned into the bus stop. So if you wanted to take a bus to Rajasthan, you would come to this place, and it was really like treated badly. And we turned this back into a cultural center for the city. And today it is one of the most vibrant cultural centers in the city of Delhi. Coming to Mumbai, which is the city that I live and work in, we have a different challenge. Mumbai the metropolitan region has a population of over 22 million. Open space is one of the lowest open space ratios in the world, and therefore there's very little open spaces. So what we did was to look at this area called Horniman Circle, which is part of colonial Mumbai. It is a 19th century urban ensemble. And the trouble with this part was that these were privately owned building, multiple tenanted and old rentals. So the tenants are not able to put money into restoring their own buildings. So what we did was, through a citizens group, we raised funds from different banks in that region, and we came up with very little money, 6,000 euro. But with that, we said, let's take up one building and restore the facade, because that is the urban realm of the city. And with 6,000 euros, we just removed the clutter and just restored the facade. And with all these signboards, which were completely cluttering the building, we asked the tenants to just put them in a particular area. What has happened since then is that it's become the center for all the high-end retail stores. And we have Hermès, we have Christian Louboutin, I believe we have Galeries Lafayette coming in here soon. And again, without government support, through a kind of private entrepreneurship, most of these areas are getting funds to look after themselves. This is another neighborhood just walking distance from Horniman Circle. It's a neighborhood of Kala Ghora. In 1998, I was part of a group of 6 people who were local citizens, and we said, let's do something about it. We took a call and we counted that there was, in this area, there were lots of offices, and the area was sort of dead at night, but there were also some museums. There was the National Gallery of Modern Art, but there was no collective urban space. So we took this, the triangular plot of land, which is a car parking lot. And we asked the government, we said, we don't want money from you, but for 2 weekends, you allow us to pedestrianize this. And we used the car parking lot for hosting some of the greatest musicians of India in free, open public concerts. And the idea was not to ticket a single show, because conservation is often seen in a country like mine as being elitist, as being something that only the rich know. But if you did not, you got the best artists, but you left it open for anybody to walk in an open space. That's fear of intimidation, of walking into this really expensive hall isn't there. And for the last 25 years, this, by using the pedestrian pathways, by using the unbuilt spaces, the side alleys, the parking lots, we've transformed this into a celebration of contemporary art, contemporary culture, but in a historic precinct. And in the last 25 years, this has become the largest urban art festival in India, which is not funded, doesn't take a penny from the government, and it's completely funded by the citizens. With the first 2 years, we obviously made no money because we didn't charge tickets, but we made a lot of goodwill. And we got 5,000 euro from the Tata Trusts and 5,000 euro from HSBC, the bank. And with that, we took the biggest building, which is the old Elphinstone College. And we actually wrote an agreement with the government. We said, this is a government building, but we, the citizens, want to restore it because it's the backdrop of our city. And you allow us to restore it using conservation practices, and we give it back to you. We don't even want a plaque. So this, in 1998 to 2001, became a conservation project using very minimal resources. And we restored this building. We recycled spaces. So in a city like Bombay, where we don't get spaces, open spaces, we use the parking lot as cultural performances. We use the steps of the town hall and Asiatic Library at night for for rock festivals and in the morning for children activities. We used each and every inch that we could get in the city. And then gradually we started making our way inside these buildings. So this is in 1833, one of the oldest buildings and the oldest library in Bombay. And this is what a typical library looks like: a lot of tube lights, a lot of wires hanging, and a lot of steel cupboards. And we finally, over a period of 10, 15 years, were able to convince the government that conservation is really not a bad thing. And then this became the first project where the government of Maharashtra put together something called a Heritage Building Fund, where at least for buildings belonging to the government, they realized that you cannot use the same cement, or you can't use the same engineers and the same policies. You have to adapt them for conservation. And this was restored as in the same period architectural style. This is one, again, so while this became a government library and conservation, this was a private building, the only opera house in India. And the opera house was built in 1916. It was considered the finest opera east of the Suez. Now, the trouble with opera is that in a country like India, we don't have, the kind of cultural performances that can feed an opera. We don't even have the kind of patronage. So in the mid-19th century, 20th century, it became a cinema hall. And then with the 1980s and VCRs and tapes, people stopped going to cinema halls, and multiplexes with air conditioning became the fashionable thing to do. So for 25 years, it just remained locked up and continued to get in a lot of, we have huge monsoon in Bombay. We have a lab condition of temperature for high humidity, for any kind of corrosion, for any kind of algae, fungal growth. And over time, this had just become a relic. It was like a ghost town. This building was considered unsafe and had to be torn down, but couldn't, fortunately, because it was a heritage grade 2A building. And I was brought in to restore this. When I saw the interior, it just didn't make sense, because the interior was very Art Deco and the building was very Baroque on the outside. And that's where, as an architect, sometimes you go into forensics. And I kept wondering, why is it an Art Deco interior when Art Deco hadn't yet come to India? And we looked at a lot of old photographs. They were mostly of the outside, so you don't know really what the interior looks like. Finally, I got information from an Australian teacher of drama who had a catalogue of the opening act in 1916 when the royal visit had come to Bombay, and this was opened up. And in that, we found that there was, on the side, there was a completely Baroque interior. But then the question was, when did it make the jump from the Baroque to the Art Deco? And was it in the 30s or the 40s? And my team and I, we saw so many Hindi films, and we went through a whole archives of Hindi films to see if there were any shot at Opera House. And we finally saw one in the late 60s with Rajesh Khanna, who was a very famous actor, where the entire, the last scene was shot inside. And this is what it looked like. And we restored it back to this. So we put in the acoustics, the air conditioning, and brought it from this to this. And today, it was opened in 2016, 100 years since its construction. And today it's one of the most popular cultural spaces in the city. And over time, the government, the municipal corporation began to understand the merit of this. So rather than raise down offices, we restored some of these most beautiful Victorian buildings in the city. And now coming out 5 minutes, so I'm going to wrap up soon. So with this, over 14 years, I collected the information on these historic buildings. And it took me 14 years to convince the government of India and then UNESCO to list Bombay's Victorian buildings as part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And finally, in 2018, the Art Deco and Victorian ensembles of Bombay were declared as the World Patrimony and a World Heritage Site. In terms of new build, we've also tried to work in context. So we worked on the largest Dussehra Maidan. Dussehra is a festival in India. It's almost like a large carnival, and it's around the, it's when public goes out and people go out onto the streets, and then they need a large urban space where they can burn the effigy of Ravana. And this is India's largest Dussehra Maidan, 76 acres of an open space. And this was designed to create better facilities for that one event, but also to create an open space for the rest of the city for the rest of the year. And it's in a little town called Kota in Rajasthan. Here, as part of our FERB's philosophy, we worked only with the local Kota stone. So all the material was locally quarried from within a 10-kilometer radius of this project. And we completed this in 2014. This is a project that we're working on. It's a new museum being built in Bombay, and it's the Balasaheb Thackeray Rashtriya Smarak. It is on the edge of the sea. And here the challenge was that it was both on the edge of the sea and within an area which had a lot of trees. So we decided, because there was a historic building, that the new building, that to the left is the old building on the edge of the sea. And this was to be a large space, but we decided that one, we will go underground and create a museum which is entirely underground, so it does not detract from the heritage building. And the second is, while we are digging underground, we won't cut a single tree. So this place has about 115 trees, and the entire design was almost like, okay, there's a tree here, so you miss it. So we've created almost kind of a labyrinth underground, but this reduces our cooling costs tremendously because the entire structure is below ground. And now I'll take you, since you're an engineering college, university, I'll take you to one project which was a mass rapid transport system. This is an underground metro in the city of Jaipur. And Jaipur in Rajasthan is a city it's built on sand. And we were consultants to the Asian Development Bank to design and audit this underground metro, which was going through a very dense inner wall city under the road, because the road is really the only open space you get. And the tunnel boring machine had to enter the city gate and go through this very, very dense market, the bazaar. And this what you see to the far left is the gate of the wall city. The entire construction is in masonry, thick masonry and lime plaster, very, very shallow foundations, and it's built really on sand. So the entire press and the public was so paranoid that the minute the tunnel boring machine goes under that gate to enter the walled city, every building will come crumbling down. And we already have a World Heritage Site, the Jantar Mantar inside it, and now this entire walled city is a World Heritage Site. So we were going to get into 2 World Heritage Sites, and the press was sort of completely fearful that all the buildings would begin collapsing. So while we were auditing this, we did an audit of each and every building, and not just the what would happen to the vibration, but a lot of them had just basic endemic they were unsafe because they had built additional floors or they had dug basements without government approval. So we sent out this huge list of letters to each and every owner saying, all right, we've audited your building. It's unsafe. Kindly do the needful. Kindly do this, that, the other before we begin. We also did another thing, is to monitor and put calibrated system of monitoring for any kind of vibration. And we went even stricter than international norms. So even 1 millimeter of movement in any building was going to set alarms right up from the chain of command to the chief minister's office. And when this central urban space, which is called a chopper, was meant to house the metro station, because this was, again, the only place where the roads opened out, and the metro station was designed here. But when we were looking at this, and this is what it looked like, we found an old photograph which showed, from the 19th century, which showed some kind of a stepwell in the center of this, which was not there because here there was just a little fountain and the rest of it was a tarred road. And we said, what if there was really a stepwell here and we are going to be completely demolishing it if we take the tunnel boring machine down? So I went back to the chief minister and said, that was Vasundhara Raje. And I said, ma'am, there's there's a possibility that this just still might be there. So do we just go right through it, or do we change course? And she said, what would it entail? I said, we would need to change the design of the metro station, take it 6 meters further underground, so that in case we are able to find this, we are able to save it. She asked us to go ahead. And this was the redesign where we took the metro station and took it much deeper. We did the archaeological excavation and we found this. We numbered each and every stone and we found these beautiful marble cows. These are called gaumoks. And this was originally in the 1700s, was this only source of water in the city. So they would have water far away in a reservoir, and through an underground system of kanats, which is something also like aqueducts, which are underground, they would bring water into this central public tank, and the water would spout through the cow faces. When piped water supply came to Jaipur, they just filled it up with debris. They didn't even bother removing it. So they just filled it up with debris and built a road over it. But nobody in 150 years had heard of it or seen it, and the city had forgotten about it. So when we found this, each and every piece of stone was numbered. The cow heads were taken to the museum. And after a year, we put this back. We restored and put back the Kund. And today the Kund is back there. But the most exciting part is now, if you take a metro, you will enter at -6 meter level, and you get out of the concourse and you walk through a museum, because by shifting the metro station down, we got 25,000 square feet of space that was turned into an archaeological museum. And through that museum, then you come up into the city. Thank you. And if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Abha, for these gorgeous speeches. And I know that you could present us more than 100 projects, but for today it's well.